Okay, for this one, we're going to try and pull things together and create an animation of a camera flying over some water towards a city as a boat drifts by and an airplane flies through the sky. So I have a sample folder for you that has all the materials we're going to use for this exercise. Make an After Effects project folder for yourself, and then within that, I've named it City Media. Select these 6 files, and I'm going to choose to import them as footage, but I'm not going to create a composition for them. I just want to bring them in as footage. I can always comp them later if I need to. So here they are. There's a few PNGs there that I made ahead of time that have transparency, and 2 videos, one of water and one of clouds moving through the sky. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is let's save this before we go any further. I'm going to call it city. Okay. And then next thing, let's make a new composition, and we're going to make it the size we're going to work. To speed things along, I'm going to make mine smaller today, 1280 by 720. You can certainly work larger if you want as well. Some of the numbers that I use may be off a little bit, but you can adjust them. I'm going to make my comp 10 seconds long as well. Probably should have named it. Let's name it now and call it stage. Okay, so I've got stage comp open down here. First thing I'm going to do is let's add our skyline to the image here. And that's an image of a city with the background cut out and made transparent. It's way too close. So first thing I'm going to do is make it into a 3D layer. And then I'm going to bring it down and scale it to about 50% all the way around. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to push it way back in space. So it's a Z position. I'm going to crank up to 1,000. Again, these numbers don't have to be precise when you're positioning it, and if you're working at a different resolution, you may have slightly different numbers, but it should look something kind of like that. Next thing, let's add the water. So the water is actually a video. It's an MP4. So I'm going to drag that down. I'm going to put it under the skyline here. You can see what it looks like. It's just some waves. And let's turn it into a 3D layer. Because these 2 layers are next to each other, we get a 3D bin. Then I'm going to go into my transform and rotation, and on the X rotation, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Now, it might be hard to see what happened, but as always, we can switch cameras. That's the best way to do this, and I really like this custom view 1. If I flip back and forth, you can see that I have clearly done this incorrectly, haven't I? Okay, it looks like I rotated it the wrong way. So what did I do here? I did the Y rotation. Set that back to 0. Whoops. And okay, let's try this again. I did the Y rotation when I meant to do the X rotation, of course. So I'm just going to take this Y, I'm going to zero it out, and let's set the X rotation to be 90, which is what I meant to do. And that looks a lot better. Now it's lying flat. The problem, of course, is that it's also flooding the city. So let's see if we can fix that as well. Let's set the Y position, which is going to be up here in our positions. The middle one is Y. And let's change that Y position to be, instead of 360, I'm going to bring it farther away from us. I'm going to bring it down to about, well, where I can start to see that shoreline. Right about there, I'm looking at the city in the background. For me, that comes out to be somewhere around 700 or so. Maybe slightly different for you. But now the city and the water are independent. Okay, so let's go back to our main view here, our default view. Okay, ooh, it looks like it was down a little too far. So I'm going to go back to my water here, and let's bring the water up just a little bit, maybe like that. Seems a little better. Okay, next thing, let's add the sky to the timeline as well. So shrink this up, sky MP4. I'm going to drag that to the back. And, you know, the problem is that city image, it doesn't actually sit flat on the timeline. So I am going to bring the water up even more. Let's go to the position of the water. Even if it floods it just a little bit, that looks a little better. Okay, and I've got my sky in the background, and of course, let's make sure that this sky layer is also a 3D layer. All three of them will be binned. And I'm going to need to push the sky backwards. So let's take its position and let's crank it way up. I'm going to drag it back to about 1500 back there. Again, somewhere around there is fine. So let's look at what we have. If I scrub this, I'm going to switch to my Draft 3D to speed things up even more. If I scrub this, you can see that I have basically a flat city layer, a flat video layer of the sky with the clouds moving in the background, and a video layer of the water that's been turned 90 degrees so it looks like it's like an ocean or a bay in front of the city. Okay, so far so good. What we want to do for this project is move through our scene. So to do that, we're going to need to move our own point of view, and that means that we're going to have to create a camera. So I'm going to move my playhead back to the beginning here. I'm going to go up to Layer, and I'm going to add a camera. What settings for the camera? Don't change anything. Just leave it by default. Simple 2-node camera. We're going to call it camera 1. Just click OK. Perfect. Doesn't look like anything's happened, except you can see that we've added a camera to our list here. And by default, it should be set up like our default camera. So if we switch to it, you'll see it appears up here. Well, it changes a little bit. It's got a slightly different point of view. But this camera 1 view is how we're going to be viewing the world from now on. This is what the viewer is going to see when we render this out. Let's bring it back to the beginning. I'm going to drill down into the camera settings to transform. I've got my playhead at the beginning. And let's do this. Let's set our position. And let's set the Z position at the beginning to be... let's come in a little closer. I don't know, maybe about there, negative 21, 2200, something like that. That's fine. And then let's go to the end here, and I'm going to change the Z position of my camera and keyframe that. I'm going to bring that all the way down to about negative, I don't know, 250, something like that. Whoops. Yeah, somewhere in there is fine. That's good. So now, if I scrub this, you can see that we move across the water, the waves are moving, the sky is moving in the background, and we're approaching this flat city off in the distance. There's a problem, though, if you look at this. And the problem is that the sky, maybe a little hard to tell here, but the sky is actually getting bigger as we approach it. We're zooming in on the sky just as we're zooming in on the city. And in reality, that wouldn't actually happen. The sky is so far away that it's not really going to move too much as we move along the surface. So I'm going to change what we did to the sky. Let's save it here if you haven't done that recently. So far, whenever we create a new 3D layer, we've been binning it with the rest. They all work as a set. But I actually don't want the sky to behave as part of the 3D world in this case. I want it to just sit in the background and always be there, same size it always was. So I'm actually going to go to the sky and I'm going to turn off the 3D. So now, I don't know if you remember from the previous exercise when we did this with the solid color layer, but no matter what happens to our camera, no matter how we move around, that sky is never going to change. It's always going to take up that same part of the backdrop. It'll actually speed things up a little bit when we render it, but you'll also notice that now the clouds aren't getting bigger as we move in. And this is going to make the illusion of space much, much more convincing. Okay, let's add some stuff to our scene to make it a little more interesting. Let's add some trees. So I'm going to go to our trees, PNG. I like to leave the camera on the top, so I'm going to move this underneath. And the trees don't look too bad. I'm just going to play with their position a little bit. And again, if you ever want to check this, switch your view. We can get a good sense of what's going on here. I'm going to go back to camera 1. And for those trees, I'm just going to make some very minor adjustments to them. First of all, they need to live in 3D space, which is why they weren't showing up when I went to custom view. That's a little better. Now we can see them living there in the city behind. Let's go back to our camera 1 view. And let's push them back in space a little bit. So transform. I'm going to position them. I'm going to bring them a little closer to us, I think. Maybe somewhere around there. Let's move the position over there so we can see a little bit of both. And now what will happen is, as we move in, we're going to move past those trees and into the scene. So keep in mind, we're creating a pretty complex motion here, moving through the trees and towards the city. But by creating a camera and by building a 3D space, we don't have to worry about scaling all these objects individually. And if we change our motion later, the only thing we need to change is the movement of the camera. Everything else stays pretty much where it is. So this looks pretty good. And again, for a quick review of what we're looking at, switch to custom view 1. And if I do this all the way through, you can see our camera coming in there. See it moving in from the bottom right. And it's going to move right across those trees. And it's going to move right up toward the city there. Okay. Back to camera 1. Now let's add a boat. So I'm going to go to boat, PNG. And then I'm going to make it 3D. It's kind of big. So let's scale it down. Let's see how much. Probably quite a bit, I would think. Let's try maybe somewhere around 20%. And then, of course, I'm going to move it down until it just intersects with the water, but not so far that it sinks. So right about there. That seems pretty good. And then let's see. Where do we want to put it? How far back? Let's push it back a little bit. Maybe about 300. Try that out. Oh, that looks fine. Okay, and now let's keyframe it. So I've got my keyframe at the beginning. Let's put the X position back here so it's just hidden by the trees there. And then by the time we get out here, well, let's see, it's probably going to be gone by then. By the time we get here, let's have this boat cruising along. We want it to be about there. Okay. Probably should have keyframed that first, right? I'm going to undo it. Let's keyframe the position. Now let's come in here and maybe by there, say maybe by about here. Let's bring it way over. And we can test it. We can see the boat's moving along. Now it's just going to stop there. So actually I'm going to pull this keyframe out all the way to there. Again, you can play with this and adjust it and make the boat move however you want it to move. That doesn't look too bad. And if we test it, let's just play it back. Well, see, it's starting to struggle. We're giving it a lot of things to think about, things that all have to be moved one after the other. We haven't even added lights or shadows or things like that yet. Okay, I can, if I need to, bring down my resolution here as well. And that should speed things up a little bit. Yeah, you can see it gets all pixely, but it renders the motion pretty quickly. And I can get a sense of whether I'm doing this right or not. Maybe I'll set it at half for now. Okay, we're going to add one more thing, and that is an airplane. So I'm going to go up, I'm going to drag in the airplane. Let's put it above the boat. Let's make sure it's 3D. It's kind of big. Let's bring it way down in size. Maybe something like that. But I also want to push it way back in space. I also need to move it up. So just my Y positioning. And I'm just trying to get a sense for how big I want it. So I'm going to move it over here for now. Push it back even more. And this is going to be a combination of pushing it back so it feels like it's really in space, but also maybe scaling it if it still feels too big, and that does feel a little large. Bring it down a little more. Maybe something like that. Okay, let's see how that looks. All right, that's maybe a believable size. Could be flying behind the city, that works. Okay, now let's put it in motion. So maybe from here, I want it to be kind of behind that building. So let's keyframe that. And then by the end, I want it to be much more over to the right, kind of like that. And we're going to miss a lot of that airplane there. So maybe it should be taking off more. If I play it here. It's not bad. If we make it take off more, let's try this out. Let's go to our last keyframe, and this time let's raise it up in the air a lot more. Now it's kind of missing off screen there. This is where I probably want to switch back to my custom view 1, or maybe even custom view 1, and use my orbit tool a little bit to see where we're at with this. Again, I can scrub it here. That's pretty good. Now the problem, of course, is if I go back to camera 1, by the time we get here, it's no longer visible. So what I'd like to do is have camera 1, when we get kind of close, I'd like to have camera 1 pan up and look at the airplane. So to do that, I'm going to play with the camera's point of interest. This is just like what we did with the light before. What is the camera pointed at? I'm going to keyframe it from the beginning, and I'm going to say maybe right about here, about the point the plane is disappearing off the top of the screen. I'm going to add a keyframe, and then at the end, I'm going to add one more keyframe, and this time I'm going to move that point of interest up a little bit. I don't see the plane there. Well, we'll fix that later. So now, what's happening? We're zooming in, we're zooming in. When we get to this point, the camera's going to start to tip up. Oh, there's the plane. And it's kind of disappearing behind that building. That's why we lost it. That's not bad. I'm going to tweak this a little bit. Let's easy ease this thing. It'll make this transition a little smoother. And then maybe by the end, let's go back to the airplane and let's lift it up a little bit higher. Let's go to that Y setting. Let's really have it take off a bit more. Now, if we preview this whole thing, what do we get? Okay, I can see the airplane taking off, the boat, the trees. Now we've lost the airplane a bit, but now our camera's going to start to tip up, and we just catch the end of it. To fully solve this, I would maybe make the camera move a little sooner. I'd play with the path of the airplane. This is your challenge to fix. See if you can make it work as perfectly as possible.